Hey there, chess kids. Thanks for finding that subscribe button. We've got some good endgame action today. Let's get to it. I think my favorite video on ChessKid is called Winning Endgame Transitions. It's what I was best at growing up. And boy, did I have an endgame transition that blew my mind recently. I was in Spain playing a simultaneous exhibition, actually lost a few games against some kids. This one was super close. I was white. Queen and pawn endgame, notoriously difficult, and I had to do some very quick calculation. Now, what you have not seen is this black queen checking my king, and my king walked up the board from h3. I realized my opponent could transition to a king and pawn endgame, and I had to do some amazingly fast calculation. To be completely honest, in a simultaneous exhibition, when I was playing 15 boards, I wasn't 100% sure, but luckily those 40 years of chess playing gave me a pretty good idea that it was winning. And in fact, have to say, my opponent, a kid, got so excited about the king and pawn endgame that he played queen f4 check without a lot of thought. And I want you to know that when you transition to a king and pawn endgame, it's not usually intuition, it's calculation. And my opponent did not calculate carefully. I have to admit though, it's an incredibly complicated endgame. Here we go. Let's see what happened, and let's see what a close call this was. Of course I have to capture, otherwise I lose my queen. My opponent takes back, and I do have to clear this pawn off the board because it's going to be distracting. My king needs to assist these old ladies to get to the other side of the street, and I can't very well do that if this black pawn is just going to march down the board. So let's collect that pawn. Now this pawn doesn't do a whole lot for black. If it tries to push down the chessboard, I can actually just ignore it because it is so far from the other side. In fact, if you do play d5, I can also just collect that pawn, and my king is close enough to stop these other two pawns, and that would actually be a long but relatively easy win for me. So my opponent did make the best attempt and played the move a5. I should note that if this king and pawn endgame began with black's pawn already on a5 and black could play a4 here, black would actually be winning. But of course, luckily for me, that was not the case. Now, it's my move, and I should not go after the d pawn here, because if I do, by moving my king over to the square e4, well, the black pawns are far enough away that I can't catch them. Black will push, and of course, if I play king to d5, the black pawns, they're just gone. And if I keep walking over, let's say with a move like king to d4, then black can just play b3. And when I take, now black will play a3. Uh-oh. And when my king goes back to c3, then the move d5, and I'll let you work out the rest for yourself. But my king cannot stop both of these pawns. I would actually lose this endgame. So we need to hit the way back button, go way, way back, and I just have to ignore black's counterplay. It's a do or die situation. My king needs to move up the board. Doesn't actually matter if I choose g5 or f5, I'm going to the same place. In the game, I chose king f5. Okay, not much for black to do here, except keep on pushing those pawns. Okay, and now this is a critical moment. In fact, I did pause a little bit at the board, even though it was a simultaneous exhibition, because when you do a long calculation, as I did before the queens left the board, it is still helpful to pause in the middle of that calculation to double check your analysis. Here, I had two candidate moves. I could march my king up the board, or I could play the move h6 and get my pawns going. They may look the same, but I have news for you. Only one of these moves wins. If I had played the move h6, it would only be good enough for a draw. Let me take a look at why. If black plays b3, which is, the natural move, okay? Let's say I take the pawn. Black will take back. And by the way, you might be wondering, can't black just push and it's the same thing? It very much matters which square black promotes on. Black needs to capture, and here's why. After the move king f6, b2, pawn to b7, if the black king goes this way, I could normally play king to g6 and checkmate with my pawn. But black will promote to queen with check, and I would actually lose the game. So if we go back to this position, I could of course try king to f7, but then pawn to b1 queen, g7, king h7, g8 queen, king takes, and I can mate, right? Right? Oh no. Black's queen was on the perfect square to stop that checkmate, so white is no longer winning. White has to scramble just to make a draw. So if we go back, that's why it was so important in this position, after pawn takes, not to push. because if you push, then when my king moves up and you play a2, I can play, well, a couple of things here, but king f7 is the clearest way to win, because when you promote to queen, then when I check and your king moves and I promote to queen and you take, then I have access to the g6 square and I actually win the game. And the funny thing is, if we go back, what if white doesn't even take the pawn on b3 and just plays king up? It is again incredibly important for black not to take. Black has to push to make sure that he promotes on the b1 square. So if, for example, king f7, promote to queen, we've already pretty much seen this, push, push, queen, king takes, and there is no mate on g6 because the black queen chose to promote on d1 instead of getting distracted by taking the a2 pawn and promoting on a1. That would be a loss if black's queen was on a1. Queen g6 would be mate. So let's go all the way back to the actual game. Okay. In this position, I did not play h6. I know it really looks like it should be the same thing, but it's not. The only winning move, luckily I found it, was king to f6. Okay. Now in this position, if black pushes, it's actually very easy to win. I'm not even going to show you the moves. I'm just going to show you some arrows. I'll just play king f7, and black's pawn is too slow. No matter what black's pawn does, push or takes, let's just say he pushes. Then I play check. The king moves, I promote to queen, and I mate on g6 as we just saw several times. So the only move for black is to play king to g8 to stop that strong king f7 idea, but now I win a very important tempo because I made black's king waste that one little move with king to g8. Now white wins with h6, and when black gets the counterplay going, now I play h7 with check. By the way, it is not good to play g7 because black will push, and when you move your king over to try to mate with your two pawns, black promotes to queen with check. So the only winning move is h7. Of course, if black goes this way, we'll promote to queen or rook. You know, want to promote to rook, I can't complain. That's checkmate. So black's king moved this way. And now after king to f7, I finally win because I won that one tempo with black's king having to move to g8. And that one tempo means the black pawn is only on the third rank. It needs to be on the second rank to promote here. Instead, it only got to b2. And when I check and the king takes and I promote to queen and the king moves here, the pawn needs to be on b1 to promote to queen to guard the checkmate, but it is too slow. Queen to g6 was mate. Whew. Won that game through one tempo and some very, very precise calculations. So kids and adults out there, those winning endgame transitions, you need to turn into a calculator to make sure you get them right. Now, in fairness to my opponent, even if he had not traded queens, it would have probably been a losing queen and pawn endgame, but he could have at least made my life a little more difficult by checking my king all around the board. That would have been perhaps a better practical try, but man, these kids are getting tough to beat, and you won't catch me playing another simultaneous against such strong opposition anytime soon.